And connect, we're going to go back to Pirkei Avot. As this week, Shabbat, we learned chapter 4 of Pirkei Avot, and actually we delved into this talk, but we didn't conclude it. And I thought it was well worthwhile to discuss, to learn this and discuss this now, particularly pertaining to the discussion that we had several weeks ago in Ain Tova, having a good eye. In chapter 4, in Pirkei Avot, the 20th Mishnah, Rabbi Meir Balanel says, Al tistakel b'kankan, don't look at the container, or don't look in the container other than what it contains in it. In other words, don't look at the container, look at what's in it. Yesh kankan chadash malayashan, there's a new container that is full with aged wine. Yashan, and then there's an older container that even new wine, ripe wine, just ripe, it doesn't even contain. So Rabbi Meir teaches us, don't look at the container other than what's inside of it. Don't judge the container other than its internal content, because you have something that looks fairly new, and therefore it doesn't have that shine to it. In other words, that prestige to it, but it's full with something ancient. It's full with something that is unique, and there's containers that look even like amazing, but it doesn't contain anything in it. In the last of the Rebbe's talks throughout 90, 91, especially 92, the Rebbe repeated the teaching that we discussed many times already. Yesh lifkoach et einayim, open up your eyes. Open up your eyes, specifically in relationship to Mashiach. Now, open up your eyes and see the truth that we are in a completely different stage of history, and that we're literally living in the times of Mashiach. The Rebbe continually said that, open up your eyes. What does that mean? When one has his eyes closed, their eyes closed, then obviously you have to tell them the reason why you're not seeing right now is because your eyes closed. Open up your eyes. But what does it mean to open up your eyes? Being that each and every one of us right now have our eyes open and we're seeing reality as is, and Baruch Hashem, if a person is blessed with 20/20 vision, obviously you see everything. And through that sight, one makes a determination of what exactly are they looking at. What does it mean? What did the Rebbe mean when he said, open up your eyes? We know that amongst our senses, the sense of sight is the most dominant. It's the very first sense that is involved in judging reality. When we view a certain phenomena or a certain incident, we automatically have a determination of what we're looking at, who is involved, what exactly happened, who is to blame for this, and who is more or less innocent. Our viewpoint gives us a sense that once we saw something, we know what we saw. And once we saw something, it's impossible to explain it other than how we originally saw it. We discussed in the past that the halacha, the Jewish law, forbids a witness to become a judge, because a judge must remain impartial. A judge must make their determination based on evidence and testimony, and then assessing that evidence and the testimony, as we discussed before. While a witness, once they saw something, no matter what evidence is presented in front of them, no matter how much testimony is given to them, they know what they saw. They already have a bias. In their mind, they already know what's happening. There might be room for post-processing and post-editing. But to a certain extent, if we don't learn how to see correctly, even after the evidence is presented and the testimonies are presented in front of us, we know what we saw. So we might seemingly revise what we saw based on new evidence. But deep inside of us, we say to ourselves, I know what I saw. There's a very famous letter from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, once that we discussed about a month ago in the class regarding suffering, that the Rebbe writes that although seeing is believing, but the truth of the matter is, it's not, as we discussed in the class, it's not the sight that sees. It's the mind that sees. It's the mind that tells the sight where to look and how to look. And as especially as we discussed last week, an empty heart, a heart that bears a void in it, a vacuum in it, will charge the eyes with looking and discovering for signals that will wake it up. And that's not necessarily a good thing. You should not go astray after your hearts and then after your eyes. So the Rebbe, in his letter, gives an analogy to this. If a complete ignoramus from 5,000 years ago would somehow enter a modern-day operating theater while an operation is in progress, not knowing about medicine, not knowing about doctors, not knowing about an operation or anything to do with this, in this person's mind, what he has actually witnessed is a murder. And these are sadists. They're taking their time. They're cutting. And they could even smirk and they could even speak about themselves as though they're sociopaths. But if you take the person aside and said, wait a second, with all due respect, is what's called modern medicine. And this medicine is a discipline that that teaches the doctors of how to alleviate the condition that this patient has and pay top dollar in order to be able to remedy. It takes time, and the knife is an unfortunate but absolutely necessary part of the procedure. They're actually saving his life. With this little bit of information, we could understand how the ignoramus from 5,000 years ago can now revise the reality in which he is, until this moment, was in shock, apprehensive, objectionable to. Says, oh, no, they're not murderers, and certainly they're not sadists, they're heroes. Same reality, different input. But then Rabbi continues in the letter. Now the guy wants to see, was he being duped when he was told about medicine, etc., or is this actual reality? So he waits. He sees how the doctors sew the patient back up and how they all leave the room, and he waits. The patient doesn't seem to be waking up. The patient doesn't seem to be happy. The patient is now he's in a coma or sleeping, whatever it is, and he thinks to himself, wait a second. I think I was duped. If in fact they were saving his life, why isn't he back up? Why isn't he going back to his family? Why isn't he not going back to live his life? See, they lied to me. What happened here? Once a person witnessed something, without the proper internal prompt of how to look at things, even with new information, or perhaps information that the witness was not privy to initially, and testimony that he did not hear yet. Even with this, he knows what he saw. So at any given moment, he could go back to that. We could definitely understand that many, many times in our lives, and certainly in the world's theater, we witness this so many times. Sight creates, raw sight creates an impression that might be completely off, that might be completely contorted, a contorted sense of reality. And unfortunately, many times, not only it creates that sense, it spurns and elicits reactions that are uncalled for, and not only uncalled for, might be downright damaging. If we only operate from the sense of raw sight, very simple. Let's look at it from a scientific perspective. I tell you, there was a very famous yechidut in the 1950s, private audience, that the man who entered to discuss his dilemmas with the Rebbe, while being prodded, the man responded to the Rebbe that he has issues with faith. How could there be a God in a world that seems to be so off? How can we say that everything is divine providence? How could we say Gamzula Tova, this too is for the good, when clearly it's not? The man was a scientist, and the Rebbe, as he taught us, would communicate to the other person from his or her field. So the Rebbe says, perhaps 100 years ago, it was hard to logically understand this. But today, with the advent of quantum science, we could certainly understand that while one might be looking at a table, and in his mind, I'm looking at a table, or a refrigerator, I'm looking at a refrigerator, or anything physical for that matter, and just see the surface. And they know what they saw. However, when we apply a quantum physics microscope, you can understand. We see clearly. There's no table. It's just energy, frequency, vibrating. And gives us the impression that there's a table. If we only use the externality of our ability to see, we're missing most of reality. We'll be living in, unfortunately, this is how the world operates. Olam Milashon Elam, the world is a construct of concealment, operates on the external of the external of the external. And that leads people to live in a fantasy world. Because what they're seeing is not the ultimate reality. We know the very famous Osher test that we were looking at a picture that could look like like an older woman or a young bride, two vases, or a vase and two faces. In other words, while the reality is reality, but the interpretation of it is altogether different. For that reason, before we even delve into the depth of this, we can certainly input to our minds from memory, and to try to bring this up every single time we're looking at something, a little asterisk. Are you sure that this is what you're looking at? Do you know 100%? Is it worth it? Is it worthwhile to react based on a drop of what we understand reality is? But this Rabbi Meir is teaching us, Al tistakel b'kankan b'ma sheyesh bo. Don't view the container other than what it contains in it. As we're going to see, Rabbi Meir is teaching us, don't look at the reality for its external frame only. But rather, we need to learn how to carefully craft our sense and talent of sight, and sync it with the internal truth of reality. We know in Judaism, there are many times when traditionally we cover our eyes. For example, a chatan and a kala, while standing under the chuppah, you often see them with their eyes closed. The chatan has his eyes, he closes his eyes, and the kala we know comes to the chuppah already with her eyes covered up. At that fateful moment when they're transitioning from singlehood to oneness, in order to establish a home, an everlasting edifice, begins with their eyes closed. We know that when we accept the yoke of heaven, when we're saying the Shema Israel, we cover up our eyes. We know that when the woman lights the Shabbat candles, she first ignites the flame. She kindles the candle, and then she closes. In order to say the blessing, she closes her eyes. And not only in theological and transformative moments do we close our eyes, but even when we give a sincere hug and a kiss to our children or to a loved one, we know that we do it with our eyes closed. And even when we are trying to recall something deep, we close our eyes in order to concentrate better. We try to disconnect from anything that will disrupt our concentration. Why do we need to close our eyes? What's the purpose of it? Wouldn't it make sense to conduct our weddings lahavdil like the rest of the world does? The chatan and the kala are looking at each other with love, with admiration, with anticipation. Wouldn't that excite them better? Create deeper anticipation? Wouldn't it be better when a woman lights a candle for her to say the blessing, being inspired by the flame? When we kiss our children or loved one, would it be better to look at them and see their smiles or their expressions as we're hugging and kissing them? Very interesting. Regarding the Torah, regarding the traveling in the desert, we know, as we've been learning in the Torah in the last few parshiot, and as well in the book of Vayikra, then when the tabernacle, the mobile tabernacle in the desert was disassembled in order to start traveling forward to follow the divine GPS, the cloud of glory, it was forbidden to look at the Aron, at the Holy Ark, when it's exposed outside. There's a debate whether this only applies to the Aron Kodesh, the Holy Ark, or to all the other vessels of the Beit HaMikdash, or the Mishkan. Is this a warning only to the Levites, to the Levim, or to the entirety of the Jewish people? And to the Kohanim as well. But in regarding what our topic, we understand that there is a commandment that forbids us to look at the Aron. While it's out of its place. What does this mitzvah teach us? In other words, okay, so there is a direct commandment not to view the Aron while it's out of its place, while it's being carried out, and so on and so forth. Fine, but we know that the Torah, God forbid, is not a history book. So the question is, wait a second, but we don't have a Mishkan, we don't have a tabernacle, and the Aron is currently not in our possession. So, of what consequences is mitzvah? But rather, we know that every mitzvah in itself is eternal, and it applies to all places and all times for the Jewish people. So, what is this mitzvah that forbids us to look at the Aron while it's mobile, while it's out of the Holy of Holies? What is it teaching each and every one of us about our lives today? It's a very interesting question regarding this. When did Adam and Chava, the first man and first woman, begin to see? Seemingly, we would assume that as soon as they were created with eyes, so we're able to see immediately. But how do we reconcile this with what the verse in Bereshit says? That only after eating from the tree of knowledge, as it says, and her eyes, the eyes of both of them opened up, and they knew that they were naked. In other words, after eating from the tree of knowledge, Chava fed Adam from the tree of knowledge as well. And it says their eyes opened up and they knew that they were naked. The verse seems to be implying that only now their eyes opened up. But obviously they saw before. So what does it mean? What does the verse mean? And what does it come to teach us? Their eyes only opened up upon eating from the tree of knowledge. Because it's impossible to say that they were blind until they eat from the tree of knowledge. And especially what the Torah says regarding Chava, when before eating from the tree of knowledge, she saw the fruit. In other words, she did see. So how do we understand and reconcile these two? On one hand, she saw, but the verse says that they opened up their eyes upon eating from the tree of knowledge, and they knew they were naked. Another point. as we discussed already in the previous classes, the sense of sight captures facts, factual reality. Right now, as I'm looking forward, I'm seeing a phone, fact. I see a window with trees and leaves, and there's, it's gloomy outside today. That's fact, fact, fact. However, there's a second stage of sight. Once the fact was captured by the eye, that fact is now transmitted to the mind, and the mind determines what in fact is being witnessed. But the verse in itself says, and their eyes opened up, and they knew that they were naked. Shouldn't the Torah say, their eyes opened up, and they saw they were naked? One of our great sages, one of our great Rabbanim, explains, the Khatam Sofer explains in his commentary, that each and every one of us are endowed with two tiers of vision. One is sight and one is vision. One is external and one is internal. The external sight views the physicality and the corporality of reality. And the internal vision connects to the internal frequency, the internal signal, the internal truth of the fact. Simple words. Sight sees the body. Vision looks at the soul. Again, Rabbi Meir Balanes teaches us, don't look at the container for its externality, but rather look for its internal content. Adam and Chava, explains the Khatam Sofer, were first, when they were created with internal vision. Adam and Chava were able to see the soul of every single nuance of creation. They didn't see the externality of anything. We know that Adam is the one that gave the names to all the animals based on the internal code. As the Alter Rebbe explains, as explained in the last chapters of the last chapter of Tanya that we've been learning, Shari Yichud, that the letters, the Hebrew letters, are not just nice calligraphy, but the letters, the drawing, the fonts of the letters reveal the manner in which the godly frequency enters this world. Adam had the internal vision to be able to see the frequencies, the life source, the vitality in each animal, and give it a name that aligns with its frequency, that represents and expresses the frequency. We know that the Baal Shem Tov taught that the name in Lashon Kodesh, in the Holy Tongue, which is Hebrew, that any given person or entity represents its inner core. For that reason, by the way, we go by our Hebrew names, because our Hebrew name is not just a nice title for us. It reveals our internal selves, our functional purpose. It's the name, incidentally, as a Rebbe explained in one of the Basit Legalim Maimarim, discourses, it's the name that connects the soul to the body. Hence, different lifetimes, same soul, but different body in that the soul has to enclose itself and operate through. For that reason, because there is a shift in the mission, the names in different lifetimes change as well. Adam and Chava were created with the first type, the internal vision. We know, for example, in the Torah, when Abraham left Canaan after there was a famine, as we discussed in one of his tests, when there was a famine, and he came down to Egypt, right before they entered Egypt, but in proximity to Egypt, it says Avram looked at Sarai and he says, "You're beautiful." Caesar says, "Why now? They were married for decades at this point." Says the Torah, he never viewed her externally. He never noticed that her physical beauty. He saw her internal self, and that's what he was connected to. But when he came into proximity to Egypt, Mitzrayim, Lashon Mitzrayim v'Gvulim, as we discussed in the Pesach classes, that internal vision suffered. It was layered up, and for the first time, he looked at Sarai as physical. But after Chava was drawn after her heart, and what was it? It's per a class that we had several months ago from the Zohar. The subtle ego that she did possess, that feeling of independency of God, prompted our eyes to look at reality independent of its internal frequency. She saw the fruit and she liked it and desired it subsequently. When they partook from the tree of knowledge, they moved from internal vision to external sight. And their eyes and our eyes henceforth are only able to capture the most external of the external reality. Our eyes only see the gashmiyut, the physicality, the corporality. They received one type of sight, but they lost the vision in the process. And this is what it means when it says that their eyes open up. The moment they ate from the tree of knowledge, the other eyes closed up. The mind's eyes, the soul eyes closed up. And their external eyes opened up. Says the Khatab Sofer, other eyes. This is referring to other eyes, which is external eyes. Lower, more world-bound. A sight that doesn't capture holiness, light, divinity. A sight that is only sees darkness. In other words, the externality of everything. A sight that only captures facts, events, experiences, and their most external state of being. And to that end, as we discussed in previous classes, when Hashem came to Adam and said, Ayeka, where are you? What did Adam says? I had to hide from you because because I'm naked. I didn't feel comfortable. I was ashamed to speak to you. How did Hashem respond? I mean, I ate from the tree. Did you eat from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? Who told you you're naked? And especially as we discussed in our prior classes, naked doesn't mean physically naked only. The deeper significance, we're naked, our clothing, our soul's clothing, the garments of the soul. Machshava, dibur, ma'aseh, thought, speech, and action. We're naked from them now. We have no way to interface with you, God. We tarnish our clothing. We saw, we thought, we discussed, we tasted. We're naked. Hashem says, who lied to you like this? In other words, what would he say? Because of our damaged thoughts, words, and actions, we feel that we cannot holistically connect to you anymore. Because we ruined everything. And Hashem says, wait a second, who told you this? Where'd you get this from? You didn't hear from me. Must be that you ate from the tree of knowledge that created a sense of independency for me. They could not perceive their innate holiness. As a matter of fact, when a person walks around with that kind of chas v'shalom, thought processes, I'm nothing, I'm stupid, I'm messed up already, nobody's going to look. That's all the externality. They're not looking internally. This is a feeling of independence. I judge based on what I know, what I see. But that's a lie. Did Hashem make a mistake with you? Is there no divine providence that allow you to fall into this pit so you could come up even higher? This is externality. The Khatam Sofer continued that because of this, it doesn't say they saw that they were naked, they knew. Why? There is a diametrical opposite mannerism between both sight and vision. When one rises, the other one is immediately subliminated. The more we use our eyes for gashmiyut, for corporality, the internal vision that allows us to connect to the soul, to the frequency, to the light, to the truth, is subliminated. And Khatam Sofer continues, if we want to preserve the ability to see truthfully, we have to prevent ourselves from looking at things externally and certainly negatively. Because in allowing ourselves to see negativity, we're training ourselves to only look externally. Remember several weeks ago when we spoke about the sons of Noah Ham went into Noach's tent and saw his father naked and drunk, and he comes out and says, Dad is naked and drunk in the tent. While the older son, Shem and Yafet, walked in backwards, each one holding on to a piece of garment in order to cover their father and not look at their father, so they won't disgrace him. But then the verse says, and their father's nakedness did not see. And as we discussed, this seeming redundancy of their father's nakedness does not see actually teaches us something very deep. They didn't see it because they didn't have it inside of them. You only see what you want to see. If you have negativity inside of you, God forbid, then you'll see negativity in everyone else and in every single situation. And that's the end. No, nothing else than that. But when one looks at the reality from an internal perspective, it's not that you're not aware that the facts right now are incoherent or incongruent and so on and so forth. It's just that you know that this is divine providence, and there's an internal frequency, an internal spark in the situation, which if you respond to, will not only excuse why this happened, it will boost everything upwards. And what does that look like practically? Yes, Shem and Yafet, Noah's oldest son, realized the situation in the tent. It wasn't that they were blind to it, but they looked at it from an internal perspective. If this is what's happening, how do we help? How do we help and not focus on the negativity? How do we remedy this? Not how do we blame or shame or scream or point fingers and look what you did and look at what this, you're calling yourself a father and this and this. No, that's what Ham did. But what did it say regarding Ham? The one who went out, it says, and he saw his father's nakedness. And perhaps this is a reason when Noah blessed Shem and Yafet, we come from Shem, Semites, Shem from Noah's son, and other nations like the Greeks, the Russians, they come from Yafet, beauty, culture, and so on and so forth. Ham, Noah's curse that his descendants will become slaves. What's a slave? Someone who has no internal will or thinking. Someone who's a byproduct to the external signals. There's a slave. There was slavery back in the old days. Today, there's a different type of slavery. What is that? What the philosophy says? For most people, freedom is nothing more than the ability to assign their own master. Some people are slaves of anger. Some people are slaves to their traumas. Some people are enslaved to their gadgets. It's a slavery. In other words, everything's external. Well, you say, wait a second, a person with the trauma, shouldn't we be empathetic, sympathetic, compassionate? Of course, not a question. But as psychology teaches, trauma doesn't traumatize anyone. It's the narrative that we carry and we constantly tell ourselves, whether consciously or unconsciously, that drives that pain and inserts it deeper and deeper and covers up the truth to the point where the person's shut down without even knowing it. They're living an external life. Certainly, they're not connected to the internal self. Had they been connected to the internal self, they would say, because this happened to me, this was inviting me to a deeper level within myself. To be able to respond to it, to grow from it, to help others grow from it, as we discussed in other classes. Ham saw his father's nakedness because that's where his mind and his heart was. He was an external human being. And external human beings don't mind looking at externalities and pointing them out to everyone. Look at you. What's the matter with you? And do you know what he did? You know what she said? And external. For that reason, Khatam Sofer says if we want to preserve and safeguard our internal vision, we have to literally train ourselves not to see negativity in its own right. Something's negative, fine. What are you doing about it? After all, this is divine providence. It's not against you. God forbid. Hashem loves us internally. Avat olam avtanu. Hashem loves us eternally, unconditionally. That's the truth. That anything he's giving it to us is giving out of internal love. Do we see it? Are we familiar with that? Do we internalize that? That's what it means to, first and foremost, don't stare at negativity. It's very interesting that I think we mentioned before, is Bodan Sfarim, that when you see someone messing up, don't look at them. There's many reasons for it. First and foremost, not to embarrass him. Number two, because it might create an impression that is not accurate, it's not truthful. And might tarnish one's internal state of vision. Might make it more dense, like a fogged up or densed up window. The more we allow ourselves to see negativity, the more our internal state of vision is closed up. Now, that's the surberah. That's abstain from bad. We know that David HaMelech said surberah v'asatev. Abstain from bad, do good, seek harmony, and pursue it. So abstaining from bad we spoke about. Don't look where you're not supposed to. Don't see negativity. Don't allow yourself to see negativity. Not in a way like you're going to look at like the person like this. Come to your spouse or your children to this, or I don't want to look at you because I'm going to see negativity. That's egocentric by definition. But internally, this would be very subtle. But there's also the vasatov, to do good. In order to open up that internal frame of vision, state of vision, we have to teach ourselves how to and train ourselves. And this is only through the lens of Chassidus. Because we discussed before, Chassidus initiates and elicits the inner dimension of the soul. We have to train ourselves to see only goodness. In every time, with all people, in every place. If, when it comes to the Surah Merav, abstain from bad, not look at negativity, in other words, what's the consequence of not looking after negativity? Well, it's something we already discussed in several classes. And today's web, don't go astray after your heart and your eyes. That's what leads to an empty heart. The heart must be always full with light. But the more we notice negativity, the more skewered our perception becomes, the less our hearts are filled with lights and warmth. And that creates emptiness when it starts scouting for you to utilize external sight in order to capture a signal. External calls upon external. When it comes to the do good, v'aseh tov, this fixes that. This corrects that. We have to start probing into the soul of the matter. With every person, every single situation, don't get dispelled by what you think you see. but train yourself to start probing deeper and deeper and deeper. We discussed it several times. We already discussed it in a class several weeks ago with how the Baal Shem Tov interprets the dictum of the Mishnah. Judge every single person favorably. We discussed one interpretation in the Baal Shem Tov. It's kol ha'adam, the entirety of the person. Before you pass a judgment, look at the entirety of the person. First and foremost, they're holy. I don't care what they said, what they did, whether they. A yid is a yid. What's the first verse of the 12 psukim? And by the way, this is 50 years that the Rebbe taught the psukim. There's many sechos in the 1976 in these months where the Rebbe taught the psukim and explains. But Torah tziva lanu Moshe Morashe Kilas Yaakov, which is the first verse that a father must teach his child upon when the child starts speaking. The first verse that the father needs to teach him is Torah tziva lanu Moshe Morashe Kilas Yaakov, and then Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The Torah that Moshe commanded us is inheritance for the house of Yaakov. What does that mean? Each one of us has a share in the world, in the Torah. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. Even if the Jew is conducting themselves externally and seemingly he or she has no shayachut, no pertaining to holiness of the Torah, each one of us, the Torah testifies. And this is the first thing that a Jewish child must know, that I have a part of the Torah, belongs to me. No matter what they look like on the outside, every Jew is a yid. In Yiddish, it's a yid. In the last year, very interesting, in the last year of the previous Rebbe life in this world, those of us who were part of the Farbrengens, especially Yud Shvat, we know that the previous Rebbe was already hinting to Yud Shvat throughout the year of 1949, 1950. When he would sign his name, Yosef Yitzchak, from the beginning of 1949 to 1950, the Yud of Yitzchak became more and more pronounced and more bold, to the point where right before the Istalkut and Yud Shvat, the Yud was very, very thick to every single person. And that year, Rosh Hashanah and Simchat Torah, the previous Rebbe discussed the Yid. A Jew is a Yid, a Yud, encompassing all the holiness. That is a seminal drop that is essentially truth in all times. Just needs to develop that, bring it out. And generally speaking, there's a talk in which the Rebbe assesses the Hashem's blessing to Avraham, that your children your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the heavens and the sand grains upon the earth. The Rebbe assesses what's the mashal. So it's very interesting, because when we look at a nice starry night, see beauty and stars and everything, but what do they look to us? They look like miniature dots. With a little finger, we could blur them all out. That's because we're very distant from them. If we come up close to them, we see that perhaps they might be even bigger than the earth, certainly bigger than us. It's only the distance, the proximity that makes it look like it's small. But if we're closer, we see how big it is. Something when we see Chaz v'Shalom another Yid and it seems small, if we look at ourselves and we look small, means we're looking from a very, very distant external perspective. But this, we have to teach ourselves to view the internal frame of every single situation, the godliness of every single situation. As we learned last week, Hashem Echad, we have to see it all the time, and that this is all divine providence, is all being brought into reality right now, from nothing to something, out of Hashem benevolence. And see it and connect to it. The Tam Sofer continues, let me teach you a very deep secret. Close your eyes, and you'll see colors and frequencies, beauty that would be impossible to see with your open eyes. Because closed eyes see that which is usually closed from us in heaven. And this is the difference between an open eye and a closed eye. The closed eye has an internal vision to see truth. The open eye, gives us an external sense of reality. In other words, if we want to see internal beauty, if we want to see the internal frequency, the light, etc., if we want to see that which is usually sealed off from this world and only remains in heaven, we have to first and foremost close our eyes from seeing negativity. Which is a very paradoxical way of saying, if I want to begin seeing, I must first close up my eye. Very interesting, because as we discussed on Shabbat, as the Zohar in Kabbalah teaches us, that most of us are walking around with the secondary vision sight, which is external, but tzaddikim have the ability to see the internal truth of everything. They have vision. And we discussed an amazing story pertaining to the Rebbe, because it was Gimel Tammuz and so on and so forth. It was a Rav, his name was Reb Pinchas, who had he had a relationship with three brothers. But one of the brothers, unfortunately, was diagnosed with the Yana Machla, with the other sickness. We're not allowed to say its name. And this family, these brothers were very wealthy, Baruch Hashem, very affluent, and they were able to go. They lived in South America, in Argentina. They were able to, with the money, because they were so affluent, they were able to go to the highest caliber doctors in order to find a remedy for their brother's sickness. But even upon visiting and being tested by the top caliber doctors, each doctor, after the scans, after the test, says, there's nothing we could do. Live out your life, but you don't have too much time. So top caliber doctors. Not finding a good enough doctor according to their opinion that's going to find at least something to do. They decided to fly to New York and to find one of the top doctors, international doctors, who was practicing in New York at that time. Perhaps he'll give us some hope. And being that they were in New York, obviously they made an appointment to enter a private audience with the Rebbe, because they heard about the miracles that the Rebbe performed, and therefore they wanted to ask the Rebbe for his blessing. So they asked the head shaliach of Argentina, Rabbi Pinchas Baumgarten, today's Baumgarten, to make an immediate appointment with the Rebbe, that they could enter the private audience, and that Rabbi Baumgarten, will enter with them in order to translate from the Yiddish that the Rebbe spoke, or the Hebrew that the Rebbe spoke, to Spanish, because they only spoke Spanish. When the time for the private audience came, the three brothers, accompanied by Rabbi Baumgarten, entered the Rebbe's holy room, and they started relating to the Rebbe in Spanish the diagnosis and then subsequent prognosis by all the top doctors in Argentina, and that all the top doctors basically gave up hope. The Rebbe responded, "You must from now immediately be very scrupulous with your kashrut and your eating." And Pinchas went to translate this to Spanish. The Rebbe heard Pinchas's translation, and the Rebbe who spoke many languages fluently. But Baumgarten didn't realize that the Rebbe spoke Spanish as well. So the Rebbe, upon hearing Pinchas's translation to the brothers, says, "No, that's not what I meant." So Pinchas revised the translation, and this time the Rebbe was satisfied. After the brothers accepted upon themselves to keep 100% meticulous kashrut at every single level, as a vessel that their brothers should heal, the Rebbe turned to the brother who is not well, and asked him, "Where in your body is a growth?" And he responded, in my chest. The Rebbe said, "Can I see it?" The brother, without hesitating, opened up the buttons of his shirt and showed the Rebbe the very place where the doctors told him the growth was. The Rebbe looked for a little bit, kept on looking, and the Rebbe then concluded, "I don't see anything though." And then immediately started giving blessings. Towards the end of their meeting, the Rebbe asked to look at the place one more time. This time the Rebbe put on his glasses, and he looked again, hearing, looking, staring, and then the Rebbe concluded once more, "I don't see anything." And the Rebbe concluded, "Please be very scrupulous with your kashrut." Remember, they had an appointment with that top tier doctor in New York several days later. For that reason, they came to New York in the first place. The doctor scanned, took tests, and within a day or so, came back and says, "Why did you come all the way to New York? You have nothing there." There's nothing. I looked at it myself. I shared it with my colleagues. You have nothing. Go back to Argentina. This is what means internalize, and that's the power of internalize, of internal vision. Not just to see, but his output as well. As we discussed, the difference between Ein Tova and Ein Tzara or Ein Ra'ah, one limits and shuts down, creating contractions. The other one opens up. So we're going to conclude over here for today. We're going to pause for today. But today's exercise is to monitor our sight. You know, we discussed meta thinking, the ability to monitor our thoughts, to think about our thoughts, to assess our thoughts from the internal perspective. We have the vision, the ability to do the same, and we must do the same when it comes to our sight and vision. What do you notice first when you look at yourself? At your spouses, your children, your parents, your siblings, the world. What captures your attention first? If it's good, good could be gooder. And if it's not, well, certainly we have to tell ourselves that I'm looking at this incorrectly, whether myself, whether others. First, we remove those dense layers that covers up our ability to see. But at the same time, as we discussed before, try to see the goodness, the holiness. For example, on the most external, I've been through so much and I'm still standing and I'm still operating. I'm doing my best. That shows me that's what's wrong with me, but what's strong with me. Look at your spouses, your children, your parents, your friends, the world, even politicians, the world in itself. See the goodness in everything. It's hard sometimes. Yeah, I'm not saying this is easy. If it was easy, it wouldn't be in Pirkei Avot and it wouldn't be in the Torah. It would become natural if animals and animal souls and so on and so forth would be to begin with equipped with this ability. We wouldn't be told to do this. But again, anytime we are given a mitzvah, and how much more so a mitzvah in the internal, from the internal, the esoteric part of the Torah, means that it requires a lot of work. Any questions?
Hi, Rabbi. Thank you so much for today's class. Quick question regarding parenting. So, if we're only seeing from a certain perspective and we're co-parenting together, how do we effect change if we're only seeing good and we are trying to also learn from parenting classes about what's not good to take it away so that we could implement the good?
I don't hear a question. I heard an answer.
So, for example, when we're operating about our days, applying everything you brought makes sense. When we're co-parenting with somebody and we're raising a child, in some ways, aren't we supposed to see the negativity so that we could actually change it?
Right. We said that in the beginning. A doctor obviously is aware of the ailment, but the treatment that the doctor gives is because he knows that internally a person should be healthy. He knows that. The anomaly isn't the sickness, the health, the anomaly is a sickness. So like just like many times we discussed, when the Rebbe, and especially the last years, would say, and Bezat Hashem Mashiach will come even before we daven Mincha, or before we daven Ma'ariv, or so on and so forth, or before Shabbos is out. The Rebbe wasn't wishing well, God forbid. The truth is, as we're going to see, the truth is that we're living in Mashiach times. The anomaly is the externality. So the question is, as we learn many times, all facts are true, but don't necessarily represent the truth. A fact could live and many times does exist outside of the confines of the truth. The Avodah, the service, is then to subliminate the fact to express the truth. They should certainly not dorm or exist outside of the construct of the truth. That's the service. So yeah, you notice the negativity, but just like what we said before, Shem and Yafet realized that their father was naked and drunk in the tent. But that was only an invitation to remedy it, not to expose it, not to ridicule it, not to shout at it, not to look down on it. The whole entire point is, okay, so now that this situation is seemingly dense, how do we remove the density and to do what needs to be done here? But I get stuck on it. A Jew is never stuck. Only one's mindset creates stuckness. A Jew is never stuck. It's only in our perceptions and our external vision that it looks like we're stuck. For that reason, in order to get unstuck, moving and flowing, we have to connect to the internal. And the internal, nothing is stuck. Just waiting for you. Waiting for you to open up in the right way, to respond in the right way, to input to the situation in the correct manner. And then the manner for which you neshama descend into this world for, to perform. But certainly not get stuck on it and hung up on it. You think about all of these protesters, free this and that and that. You try to set them aside and say, wait a second, let's discuss this. They don't want to discuss. As soon as any truth comes in, and this goes into every single one of these type of protests, as soon as any truth has been communicated, they're going to start screaming, and I don't want to talk to you anymore. And because they saw pictures, they saw reality which was manufactured for them, and they refused to look internally. So they know what they saw, and that's it. Anything else you're telling us, you're trying to lie to us. We don't want to hear you. Certainly not listen. And that, unfortunately, that promotes itself. Externality promotes more externality, more vicious, more brute, and so on and so forth. Because that's the world. The more you notice the concealment, the more the concealment becomes real. As an end to itself. All right, we'll continue tomorrow, Mr. Hashem.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.